We are on our fifth video on oogenesis and something to do on a no school Monday. So I hope you guys are enjoying your day off today. By the time you listen to it, probably isn't going to be Monday though. Some of you probably looked at the word and was wondering how she's saying this because it looks like Oogenesis. It's actually like oogenesis. So I kind of broke it down for you to kind of look at it. The second O kind of makes like an I or an sound. So it's oogenesis. And by definition, this is the formation of eggs in the ovaries. But we're going to find out this is not as easy as spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis is a very simple process, very easy to take place. Unfortunately, this one has a lot of variations. So we will end up with starting off with a diploid cell like we've done in the past in the beginning of meiosis. But at the end, instead of creating 4 cells, we create 1 egg and 3 polar bodies. Spermatogenesis would just produce a total of 4 cells. And the other thing that we notice with this one is that the cytoplasm is not going to divide equally. In fact, we're going to have that happen twice in this process as we look at the entire meiosis process of oogenesis. And there's a really important reason why that is. And the reason why that is because of the egg having to sustain itself before the placenta is formed. In other words, it has to carry the nutrients for the baby. So you want a lot of materials going to the egg. Sperm, on the other hand, is the smallest cell in the human body because it divides in half and it divides in half again. So we're looking at the largest cell and the smallest cell in the human body. And at the end of cytokinesis 1, we do have 1 large cell, which we're going to call the egg cell, and then we end up with 1 polar body. The polar body is just like the egg. It has the same genetics. It's just when we do the split, the chromosomes will vary just a little bit, but it's going to be a lot smaller. As I mentioned from the last slide, for cytokinesis 2, it's also going to split unequally. Most of the material is going to go to 1 egg, but only a little bit's going to go to that small polar body. So the end result, as I said before, 1 egg, ovum cell, and then 3 polar bodies. And the ovum, as I mentioned in the last slide, needs to be bigger to support that baby. Now, there are 3 very important reasons why we have these polar bodies. These polar bodies will not survive. Can they get fertilized? Yeah, but it's not going to develop into a viable pregnancy. It does help give more cytoplasm to the ovum, that egg cell, which, again, very important because that egg cell has to survive on its own for a while. And it gets rid of a chromosome set to make that ovum haploid, which is really important. Remember, we can only have half the chromosomes. Without these polar bodies, that egg cell would not be able to do that. So 3 really big important reasons why we have these polar bodies. Here's a quick picture of oogenesis. You can see that we start with this root cell that goes into a primary oocyte, and at the completion of meiosis 1, I get a secondary oocyte and a polar body. Then, as I complete meiosis 2, that secondary oocyte will divide unequally into an egg and another polar body. And it's not until after fertilization that takes place. If an egg is not fertilized, it doesn't go through that second division, and it's just released out of the body. The actual production of eggs start when the female is still in the mom's womb. It prepares, but it freezes at prophase 1. And then those eggs, the female will carry around, and it's not until she reaches puberty that they actually will start maturing. And then we got a timeline between that of when eggs are released, and it's between puberty to menopause. And there's no exact number, and it varies from female to female of how long that is. So it's not a continuous process, and that's why there's a certain age where a female cannot get pregnant anymore. Another thing that we looked at was that the ovum needs to be large. We talked about the cytoplasm being extra cytoplasm, the unequal cytokinesis, really important for those extra nutrients. And that will also nourish the fertilized egg until the placenta develops. So there's a long period of time where we have to wait for that placenta to connect to baby, and that we'll talk about a little bit more on our final video. As I previously mentioned, the development of the eggs actually happens before the female is born. And while in the womb, the female will produce around 2 million immature egg cells. She's not going to use all 2 million, but she's going to produce those. And those egg cells will get to the part of prophase 1, and it's just going to freeze. And it's going to be stuck at prophase 1 until puberty. At puberty, there's a whole bunch of hormones that will be released, and that will then tell these egg cells to complete at least meiosis 1. So it stimulates the process of meiosis 1, gets into meiosis 2, but freezes at metaphase 2. So it's a stop, go type system, where it goes for a little bit, then it stops, goes, stops. A little bit different than spermatogenesis, where you're continuously producing these sperm cells. Just another picture. On the top part, you kind of see a cloud that's supposed to represent the ovary and the separation of the eggs. And you can kind of see they have a little line that says before birth how far it gets, and then after the female is born where it gets into, and then we get into where it matures in the different egg cells. So again, different processes depending on the age of the female, what's going on with her egg cells. So some of you are probably wondering, I told you that it freezes at metaphase 2. Well, when do we ever complete oogenesis? And that's what I'm going to kind of get into in the slide, is when does it actually get completed? One thing to recognize, for humans, we have a mature egg released once a month. That varies from animal to animal. Some animals release several eggs. If you think about like a dog, we kind of talk about she's in heat. That would be where periodically a dog will release a series of egg cells, and then they'll get fertilized. If you think about like cats or rabbits, where they give birth to a lot of animals, there's going to be several egg cells that are going to be released. Typically, humans will only release 1. Every once in a while, they will release 2. Very rarely is it natural where there would be something like 3, where you would have natural triplets. So, and when we release 2, we call those fraternal twins, 2 separate eggs, because they have 2 separate sets of genetics as well. Now, as we talked about 2 million. That female is only going to have a total of 500 mature eggs in her entire lifetime. So what happens to all those other cells? They slowly die off. And when it gets to about like 2,000 cells left, the body kind of notices that signal, and it starts the process of menopause. So that's one way that the body can tell that it's ready to stop producing eggs. Now, once I get what I call mature egg, it's not completely done with meiosis 2, but it's ready to be fertilized. It's going to leave the ovaries, and it's going to enter the fallopian tubes. And fallopian tubes is where almost all fertilization takes place. Now, that ovum is not going to complete meiosis unless fertilization occurs. And if then we have a sperm able to go through and penetrate the strong cell membrane of that egg cell will quick divide one more time, and that will make it into a haploid cell, producing that large egg and a polar body. And once we get that fertilized ovum, we call it a zygote at that point in time. Again, that'll be more that we'll cover next chapter with fertilization. Okay, so that's all I have for oogenesis, and we only have one video left.